Good afternoon. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to say thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. For those of you who are members of Nonprofit Utopia, or those of you who have been following, you may know that we're focusing on human resources during the month of August 2022. And today we're going to talk about looking at organizational structures as well as your culture, trying to make sure that you can develop the optimal culture and structure for your organization that will lead to sustainability. So, without further ado, I am going to share my screen and we'll get right to it. All right. So, our topic today is built to last, developing a strong organizational structure and culture for your nonprofit. We are Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. It's our goal to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders, and we do that through webinars and webinars and live streams such as this. We also have a number of courses on demand. We have an online community. And if you want to find out more about us, you can go to nonprofitutopia.com or you can join our community at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Alrighty, so we're going to start off with organizational structure. So often when we, especially our emerging groups, when we look at our organizational charts, we usually do it because we want to complete a proposal, or it might be, something a nice to have in our, organizational documents. But if we are really, really smart, we will use our organization chart to not only describe an organizational structure, but we'll use it as a management tool so that we can identify who's on first, so to speak. Look at our workflows, look at how our work is organized and how best to streamline that work so we make the biggest impact to our customers as well as save money. We want to make sure that we don't have any functions that are duplicative or any of that good stuff. So we're going to talk about the organizational structure first, and then we'll talk about the organizational culture, right? And give you some ideas as to how you can proceed to improve the culture as well as streamline your organization so that you make a bigger impact. So one of the things that we often get confused, some people use interchangeably the terms legal structure of the organization and the organizational structure. There's a slight difference. When we talk about the legal structure of an organization, we're actually talking about the tax treatment. Are we organized as a corporation? Are we organized as an LLC? Are we organized as a partnership or a limited liability partnership or as a social enterprise, L3C organization? And at the state level, not only are we looking at the tax treatment, but we're also looking at how those organizations are handled in terms of the liability for their corporations, right? So we're not talking about that today. We're not talking about the type of business you have. By default, any nonprofit is going to be organized as a corporation. But again, that's not what we're talking about here. We're actually talking about the workflows, right? So the organizational structure itself is based on, the flow of work, is based on roles and responsibilities, reporting structures. It gives us a roadmap, so to speak, or a day-to-day guide as to what the governance structure is, right? So your board, decision making, and also the operating structure. So that could be your programs, It could be your legal, it could be marketing, fundraising, and all of that good stuff. And lately, when you look at some org charts, and you'll see this more in the for-profit, not only do the org charts have the departments and maybe the department head's name, but it will also include things like the key performance indicators or how long that person has been in that position, whether or not that person is performing, so it's definitely used as a performance management tool. But typically we see that more so in for-profit than nonprofit. Nonprofit is more traditional and tends to just focus on the structure of the work and who is over different departments, and then who reports to them, who they report to, and all of that good stuff. But it's also good for employees to know literally where they stand, who's who within the organization, who they report to, who might report to them, who they might have relationships with in order to get the work done. And that's usually based on a number of things. First and foremost, it should be, based on our mission, vision, and core values. Our mission is what it is that we are in business to do. Why are we here as an organization? And our vision is, how do we perceive the world as having changed as a direct result of the work that we're doing within our organization? And then our core values, those are those absolute things, to an organization. Things like honesty, integrity, how do they do their work? What types of filters do they use in order to make decisions? All right, so other things that determine our organization's structure would be the types of problems we're solving. So clearly a housing development corporation for a nonprofit is going to be structured a little bit different than the youth development program, which will be structured differently from other social services programs. Is going to be determined by the sector we serve. The nonprofit sector has different subsectors, as I just indicated by example. It will also be determined by our goals and objectives. What is it that we're trying to achieve over the short term, over the long term? And that will have a real strong determinant, or it should have a strong determinant as to how we're going to structure our organizations, our departments, our projects, the activities, um, the type of experiences we want our clients to have, because we really want our clients to not have to interface with everybody that they see, see on that chart, right? We want to create a streamlined experience so they can go from point A to point Z, right? Get their services, get in, get out. They shouldn't have to interface with the whole department, right? And by the same token, we want to make sure that we are structuring our organizations such that we can bring as many resources, that we have to bear on that one individual. We also want to look at, what our financial and human resources capacity are. Obviously, organizations with lots of money and lots of people are going to be structured just a little bit differently than those organizations that are just starting up. However, it should be noted that you can have a multi-billion dollar corporation or organization. You can have a $2 organization. And I know I'm exaggerating on either extreme, but there's some basic functions that organizations have to have in place regardless of how many people they have, how many dollars they have, right? So just think of those basic functions that you need in order to get the work done, in order to serve your clients, all right? And even our organizational culture, which is our way of doing things or our personality as an organization, that's going to impact the way the organization workflows. And then our desire to streamline operations. Sometimes we get to the point where we just kind of grow and we're not as intentional or strategic about what that organization looks like. But if we can tailor the organization in such a way that we can be as efficient as possible. We get rid of any duplications that we see in our structure, unnecessary duplications. Sometimes organizations that are structured geographically, you may see some duplication of functions, but those functions are duplicated, from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, etc. All right. So in summary, organization structure is about, how we do the work, how the work flows, our reporting structures, right? And the organizational culture, right, is all about, our personality, how we actually do things, not the way the work flows, but, what are our preferred ways of doing things, communicating with people, customs and, spoken rules and unspoken rules. All right, so where do we start? And believe it or not, our organization culture, as well as our structure, begins from the day that we start our organization. So, the day we start filling out an application to create our organizations, we can be very, very intentional about the kind of culture we have. How do we want to treat people? How do we want to reward people? Even if you don't have any employees, those are some things that you need to start thinking about right away. And in terms of the structure, legally the structure is going to be a corporation, right? But when you look at your bylaws and the bylaws describe the officers, that is the first part of your organization structure, whether you have employees or not. Your board, the way that is structured, the officers you have, the committees that you have, how often you meet and your policies and stuff, all of that you know plays a role in your structure, and it could also impact your culture. All right, so typically, most nonprofit organizations have that traditional hierarchical structure where it's top down. You have the CEO up top, and then you have what we call the C-suite, for the larger organizations, where you have your chief financial officer. The CEO is part of the C-suite, but he is facilitating all of that work. You have your chief information officer. So all of the chiefs of these different departments, right? And then they have people that report to them, and those people, those middle managers have people that report to them. So it's typically top down. And that structure really gets its basis in more military cultures, where you want to make sure that you have, an optimal number is say 10 people, hopefully no more than 10 people reporting to any one person. You might have more, but typically that's where it comes from, making sure that there's efficient division of labor. All right, so here is a typical hierarchical structure. This could be anybody's for-profit or nonprofit organization. You will have the name, for example, the name of the person, their title, the department head, and then you have the names of the people that report to that department head, and then you have, the people that report to the people that report to the department head. All right, and then next you have the matrix structure, and those are, typically for large teams. You will see consulting firms in many instances or law firms out, that are structured like this, and it basically wants to help people who have different reporting lines of authority. They might have to report to more than one or two people, and those people are usually representing different, what we would call disciplines, right? So it's good to get those multidisciplinary teams and making sure that the team reports to various team leaders, right? So, for example, an IT developer might report to the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, but they might also, if they're developing products, working to develop a product, they might also be report to that department lead. Now, it's good because you can get feedback and input from all the various disciplines that are impacted, the departments that are impacted. But as you grow, and even if you're not growing very fast, if you're not very clear about those lines of authority and how the relationships should work, you can easily end up in a situation where there is conflict. And that's not so common, again, for nonprofit organizations, but I thought it would be helpful for you to see what that could look like. So for example, in this example, you've got various project managers, and here in this column, and then across here, you got different divisions, right? Different managers here. So this person reports to the functional division manager as well as to this project manager. So where you see intersections, that helps you to understand who these people report to. And that could be really, really confusing sometimes because it's really hard to serve more than one master, so to speak. There's always going to be competition for resources, in particular, these human resources that have to devote their time to various projects, right? And then after that, we have the flat organizational structure. Now, this flat organizational structure will be very common to new nonprofits because you may not have the resources to really divide up the labor like you want to. You might not have enough money to do hiring where you have these middle managers. So you will have a CEO, the founder of the organization, the executive director of the organization, who is actually supervising people, various people, and there's nobody in between that those people and the CEO. All right, so you might have the CEO, and the staff could be, the administrative assistant, as well as an accountant, as well as somebody who is directing program A. You might have somebody who is also doing fundraising. You might have someone who is over the finances. All of these people report to the CEO. And the advantage to that is you have eliminated all of these extra layers of management, and you'll be able to move pretty quickly, make decisions pretty quickly. You don't have that much bureaucracy. But over time, this will get to be unwieldy, as you bring in more money, more resources, more people. At some point, it's going to be more efficient for you to start dividing up the labor in terms of function, in terms of geography. And when I say function, I'm talking about, program, who heads programs, who heads the financial piece, who heads fundraising, and that kind of thing. But for right now, um, the flat structure is working, until it doesn't work, right? All right, so now we're going to talk about the actual process for developing the organization chart. So one of the first things you do, if you're in business already, as a nonprofit, you want to look at what works, what doesn't work, right? Are there areas where processes and even reporting structures can be streamlined, where communication can be streamlined? Does the structure in and of itself cause some sort of conflict, right? Whenever you get two or more people together, there's bound to be some conflict, but some of that conflict can actually be alleviated by making sure you have clear lines of reporting, right? So people don't feel like they're, torn between two bosses, so to speak. All right. And then you want to also keep in mind, how does this current structure actually impact your clients and your community? Does this structure allow you to maximize your impact, right? So you want to review your organizational structure, within the context of your current strategic plan, right? If your strategic plan calls for XYZ strategy, look at your organization structure and see if that organizational structure actually reflects the strategies, through the um, personnel, right? What's going on in the environment? What are your core values? What are your goals? What are your mission? What changes do you anticipate? And when I say changes, changes in the environment. Are those changes in the environment, be it the funding environment, be it the physical surroundings, in terms of your clients, are there going to be any changes to uh, the way things were, to the status quo, right? How is that going to impact the way you do your work, the structure of your work? What was the outcome of the strategic plan? Are you going to develop new programs and services? Are you going to eliminate some programs and services? And if so, what impact is that going to have on your organization chart, right? Will you need to incorporate new programs, new processes, right? Will you need to hire people in anticipation for the change? And most importantly, is that structure in alignment with your strategic plan? And then you want to build or restructure the organization based on the priorities in your strategic plan. So, what are some of the activities your organization is going to engage in order to achieve the mission, vision, goals outlined in the plan, right? And how is this structure going to impact the client? Will the client have to see several people? Will the client feel like they're being passed from department to department, or will the client interface with a person, who will then interface with people in the organization that the client doesn't have to see? So you're thinking two things. One, you want to make sure that the workflow is efficient. You're not duplicating, processes, or, creating a situation where people feel, a little scattered as to who they report to. But also you want to make sure that you are serving your clients, right? And then you can think about different ways to structure the work, right? Will your work be structured such that you're kind of replicating the same basic organization from city to city, from community to community, right? Or is it going to be organized by function, meaning program, financing, fundraising, and other operations? Or some other way of structuring it. It has to have a logical flow. And then after you think about that, then you add the people, right? You put who's in charge of which department, what function, etc. Depending on how complex your organization structure is. Now, there's some organizations that include things like pictures and contact information, the number of years experience the person had with their organization, right? The salary, the skills, key performance indicators, and their ratings. That way, they're looking at the organizational chart. They can see at a glance, who's ready for promotion, who might need a little bit of counseling, right? Who might be ready to make some lateral moves, who might need to be counseled out of the organization. So, we've come a long way from just lines and boxes. Again, the organizational chart can be used as a management tool. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to post and I will get to those after we're done. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the organizational culture. Remember, the structure is what work gets done, right? How it flows from point A to point Z. So it gets done, how we break things up into function, how we break things up geographically if need be. The organizational culture is, a set of behaviors or normal behaviors that we have. It's the attitudes that we have. It's the way we do things. These things, it's a combination of hundreds of things, both written and unwritten, that help us characterize the personality of our organizations, right? So organizational culture is a set of shared workplace beliefs, right? And I want to stop here too. When we talk about our core values, it's one thing to write about our core values and this is what we believe as an organization. That may or may not be aligned with your culture. So, when in doubt between what an organization says it is and believes and what they do, which is the culture, right? Regardless of whether it's written down, what they do is more descriptive of the culture than what they write. All right. So, your organization's culture is the sum of all that you and your colleagues think, say, and do as you work together. And as you know, that's very, very important. And as I indicated before, your core values, those are your absolutes, those are guiding beliefs and principles that you filter every decision and hopefully every action through, right? So it frames how you're going to deal with customers, your partnerships, your employees, and your stakeholders. Again, to the extent that whatever you write and whatever you do can be the same, that will all the more strengthen your culture. But if there is a difference between what it is you have on paper as to what you say you believe versus what you do, then that's going to cause a schism. The more those two differ, the bigger the schism will be in your organization because people sign on to join an organization, whether it be as a board member, a volunteer, or an employee, based on what it is that you say that you are. But they might come in and find out that you're not who you say you are. You are actually something different, right? This saying, I can show you better than I can tell you, right? So when you look at the difference between the core values and the culture is what it is we do, how we behave. The core values is what we say we are, right? It is used to help us filter our decisions. And ideally, you want those two to be as aligned as possible. All right, so some examples of indicators of organizational culture. The way you assign work, right? Whether things are documented in writing or whether people just talk about it. How conflicts are handled. Do people address the conflicts? Do they have to go through a chain of command? Is there one person? Is there one department? Do they tend to bury their heads in the sand and hope that things will go away? Or do they address conflicts head on? Are there procedures in place so that the way the conflicts are handled are standardized? Are there opportunities for advancement? And are those advancement opportunities granted on an equitable basis? How do people work? Do they work in silos? Do they work collaboratively? Is the collaboration actually valued? What is it can they talk about? What can't they talk about? Right? What's taboo? Is there pressure to work when you're sick? Or is there actually pressure to make sure that there is work life balance, right? People have to go home at 5 o'clock so that they can come back the next day refreshed. Do you celebrate birthdays? Do you celebrate achievements? How do the departments get along? Do they work cooperatively or is there competition? Does management actually foster competition so that, one person or one team wins at the other team's expense? And how do you feel about that, right? Do you get a chance to have FaceTime with the higher ups? All of those things and probably millions more make up company or organizational culture. All right. And it's really important too to have a strong company culture. Positive cultures mean, or they usually result, shall I say, not mean, they result in, greater impact, more productive employees, right? And not only do you get, more out of your employees, you actually become more profitable as an organization. When your workers are happy, they're more productive, and when they're more productive, assuming you have an efficient way of doing things, then you can't help but bring in more organization, I mean, more money, I'm sorry. So some of the benefits of a positive organizational culture, there's increased engagement, so more communication between the higher ups and people on the ground. There's more creativity and innovation. There is improved customer satisfaction, improved experiences. Happy employees can give better customer service, right? And that is also in the nonprofit, right? You have reduced turnover and as a result, lower costs for recruitment, higher productivity, improved morale, greater interest from top talent, increased revenue and profits. All right, so the Harvard Business Review, they have identified 8 distinct culture styles. So just think too, these are positive culture styles, so they lump the types of um, culture styles into 8 different groups. But remember, for every one of these positive cultures, because there's nothing right or wrong about these cultures, for every positive culture, there is a negative culture, right? So some organizations are nurturing, caring, collaborative, and supportive. The opposite of that, people are cold, callous, they don't care, they don't work together as a team, and they're cutthroat rather than supportive, right? So I'm not going to read through this list, but these are the 8 pockets of organization culture. And if you are a member of the nonprofit Utopia community, you will have access to a booklet that goes into more detail about this. All right, so characteristics of great organizational cultures. They encourage diversity, and diversity, not only racial diversity, but the way people think, the way people approach problems. They help new hires feel welcome. They make people in the community feel welcome, right? They engage their employees. There's promotion of um, growth, right? Strong performance and loyalty. They are inclusive. People don't feel shut out of decisions. And, everybody may not agree, but people walk out of conversations feeling like they were at least heard and respected. Um, Great cultures are also cultures that recognize people, right? They recognize accomplishments, they recognize key milestones like birthdays and anniversaries, and then they prepare for the future, right? So those are all hallmarks of positive cultures. And again, we're not going to focus on the negative cultures, but I'm sure you have worked in toxic environments where, for example, rather than encouraging diversity of thought, instead of encouraging diversity of people, right, where they're from and their backgrounds, they they just want to hire people who are just like themselves. Those groups become very insular. Over time, they don't grow. It's just like being inbred, for lack of a better word. And over time, if they don't grow, they just kind of coast along until they die. People who are innovators don't want to be part of those organizations. All right. And that's just one example of a negative culture. All right. So now we're going to talk about 12 steps to improving organization culture. And, you know, improving organizational culture is, it Doesn't have to be hard, but if you're in a toxic environment, it can be very challenging. And, to be realistic, you're not going to change your culture overnight, but you also have to be very intentional about the changes that you want to make. You got to be intentional about reinforcing it, and the leader has to model the changes that they want to see. And if it's not necessary to make a change in the culture, they have to model what that culture says it is. So if you have core values A, B, and C, then you as a leader, whether you're the CEO or the chief bottle washer, you need to embody those core values while you're at work, right? One, you've got to know where you're going. So again, you got to revisit your mission, vision, and core values. And then you want to find people who fit within those mission and vision and core values. You're not necessarily looking for people to be cookie cutters, right? Because you still want diversity of thought, but you want people who complement those core values. They embody them without being people who can't think for themselves. And obviously, you want them to have the skills, right? And here is a study that tells you why, lets you know why it's important to hire candidates with the right fit. The Society for Human Resources Management, they actually did a study and found that on average, the cost per hire is $4,129, and it takes 42 days on average, right? So that means there's some that take longer, some take less than 42 days, right? So you're spending all this time, all this money, but what happens if that person doesn't even stay, right? You didn't do a good job of vetting that hire and they have to leave before 3 months are out. And then you have to go through that whole process again, right? So it's very, very, very important that you develop systems that help you to find the right fit up front, right? Rather than trial and error and spending all that money. All right. You also want to make sure that you help new employees fit in. So you want to create not only a strong onboarding process, right? Orientation and a series of activities that help them really, really understand, how to make their way around. But you might want to use a buddy system where, they can follow up with someone, who's willing to, be a sounding board and help them navigate the company culture. You actually want to be intentional about talking about the company culture. Just like you hear advertisements over and over, you start to really embrace those, and you might find yourself unconsciously repeating, different ads that really resonate with you. So you want to get to the point where you're making statements about your culture that resonate not only with you and top management, but it resonates with the employees and they begin to adopt this culture for their own. And most importantly, you want to show them how they matter, how they fit in, how what they do fits into the big picture and that they're important. Excuse me. We already talked about setting the right example, meaning you should model the behavior and the values that you want to see in your employees. So this could be integrity, empathy, determination, right? So when you embody the things that you say your organization is about, then people are more likely to respect you as a leader and fall in, right? So, for example, if you want to foster transparency and trust in meetings, the leaders have to be as open and honest about the organization's challenges as they are, about the successes. So if there's a chance for your organization to lose a grant, you need to let that be known so you get the energy of the full organization thinking of ways that they can offset that loss, right? In order to encourage open communication between all levels of your organization, you need to, as a leader, walk around, talk to people, see how they're doing, keep your ear to the ground, be able to identify problems early on, talk to people, get people's opinions, and help them answer their questions. One of the most frustrating things that can happen is if you, as an employee, you have a gripe, you have a question, and then the people, who are your superiors don't want to address issues, and those issues might be allowed to fester, and you get tired and leave, right? And then you want to also promote teamwork, right? So leaders should welcome collaboration on their own tasks, right? It's not enough to talk about collaboration. You have to actually collaborate yourself as a leader so others will begin to adopt those behaviors. And then you want to integrate your values into everyday activities. So you teach your values and their significance to each new employee during orientation and onboarding. You want to stress the importance of your values during the company meetings and in company communications. And you don't want to do it in a way that, you sound cultish or beating people across the head, but you need to, reiterate and reinforce these words with real actions. You want to make sure that your external messages to the community, to your funders and other partners. You want to make sure that it reflects the same values that you hold so dear, to make sure that your branding is consistent. And then you want to make sure that as you make, decisions in terms of, the types of programs you're going to have, the types of investments you're going to make, that those are consistent with who it is that you say you are, right? And then you want to use your values to guide performance management and help underperforming employees improve. All right. So you want to make sure that you also, give rewards and recognition. You don't want to give meaningless awards, meaning that you're giving the same award to the mediocre performer as you are to, your high achievers. You want to make sure the award system is fair. You want to make sure it's inclusive. Everybody has a chance of getting, you know, some recognition at some point. You want to make sure that you recognize people relatively soon after the achievement. And you want to be very specific about what that recognition is about. You also want to make it highly visible to encourage other employees to model that same kind of behavior. And you want to make sure, too, that the rewards actually fit the achievement. Number seven, you want to keep up with changes. For those of you who are baby boomers, and I'm the very tail end, when we came of age, the workforce was very, very different. And we need to be able to adapt to the changes that are required today. COVID has changed a lot. Our millennials and younger generations, younger than the millennials, they have certain expectations and experiences, and we need to be able to create an environment in a workplace that actually reflects, an environment that they want to work for, right? So one of the best ways to adjust is, yes, you want to have best practices. Nonprofits are really good for that. But in addition to, and probably even more important than best practices, are best principles. So principles tend not to change over time, where practices or the way you do things, those can, sometimes become obsolete. So Ben Peterson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Bamboo HR, he says, your policies should set company goals, communicate them to your employees, and then let them work it out with each other. Frequent feedback sessions from management to employee, from peer to peer, from employee to management help everyone understand what needs to change. And then you work together, not just the board members in their silos, right? Not just the C suite, deciding things and then, sending a memo to everybody else saying this is what we're going to do. That's just not going to work these days. Needs to be all hands on deck. All right. Number 8, you want to pick the right perks, right? So some of the most popular ones are flexible work schedules. So these are in addition to, your other, standard benefits. Things like flexible work schedules, employee discounts, ability to telecommute, paid parental leave, family leave, company subsidized meals or snacks, and then personal time off for volunteering. You got to remember the millennial generation, when they work with nonprofits, they don't want to just give money. They actually want to, be more hands-on. All right. And great cultures also foster more feedback. So you got a constant feedback loop, right? You have open and honest communication amongst people at all levels, but you also have controlled communication channels so things don't, just blow up in your face. But you definitely want to have ways of back and forth communications to uh, make sure that everybody is on the same page. And then you want to develop and monitor key metrics, right? So you can actually develop a form that helps you measure yourself on 10 key metrics. So the first five are you want to look at how communicative your environment is. Does it foster understanding between the leaders and employees? Is it innovative? Do you welcome new ideas or do you shun new ideas and figure out ways not to or reasons not to take on new challenges or new ways of doing things? Are you agile in your workplace? Are you adapting to changes, right? And can the whole organization respond in a nimble fashion, right? Do you encourage wellness that is physical as well as mental? Do you prioritize the work environment, making sure that it's comfortable and, you foster productivity as opposed to contributing to burnout? Is it collaborative? Do people work well together in teams and between teams rather than having folks, in cutthroat competition? You know, is everybody supportive of one another? That includes your peers, your leaders, and the overall organization, from the board to, the least paid employee. Are you performance focused, right? Are there goals? Are there objectives? Are you measuring your progress toward those goals and objectives? Is the performance actually rewarded publicly, right? And appropriately? Are you responsible? So, are there individuals and teams holding themselves accountable for their decisions, their actions, and the results? And what happens, when they don't meet the results, right? And then, are you well aligned? Do employees know, understand, and live by the organization's missions and values, right? Not only that, not only do they know about it, but are they actually incorporating, activities that suggest that they can reach those mission, visions, goals, and objectives within the context of your core values. Because there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And you preferably want to skin the cat that is consistent with your organization's core values. And then number 11, you want to fix what's broken. So going through a change management process. You want to analyze the issues that people articulate what some of the issues are that are keeping the organization from moving forward and being the best that they can be. So the first thing you do after you assess the situation, you want to articulate what the problems are and then, determine, where is it that you want to go. Then you want to select and develop leaders, who are in alignment with where it is you want to go. Those can be internally or externally, right? And then you want to, look at strategies, look at their skills, right, for developing strategies and their ability to actually implement change, right? And then number three, you want to make sure that there's constant conversations about the culture and underscore that it's very, very important to change. You want to give people the rationale for the change, but most importantly, when you start talking about change, the first thing people think about is, okay, how am I going to lose out, right? What bad is going to happen to me, right? So you need to be able to, help people understand that change is their friend, and you want to be able to reinforce that desired change, get people's buy-in, but you want to also create the optimal organizational design that encapsulates all of those changes that are going to be necessary to take you on the path of creating that new culture. And then finally, once the culture is quote unquote fixed, you can't just leave it like that, right? You have to constantly revisit issues to make sure you're reinforcing the positive culture. If other changes are necessary, you need to be able to create an environment where that change is actually done. And you want to basically look at this continuous improvement formula, which says you plan, do, check, and then act. You want to observe what's going on, you want to evaluate, analyze, strategize, act, and then repeat. All right, so it's a constant cycle. All right, so that concludes the presentation. I'm going to check and see if there are any questions, any comments. Feel free to post. And for those of you who are in the nonprofit Utopia community, feel free. We can continue the the conversation in the nonprofit Utopia community. And Lance, I just want to say thank you. Lance Moore, he and I were colleagues at Kellogg. It's great to see that you have stopped by, Lance, to say hello and give me encouragement and say that it's good info. You have made my day, especially at 4:56 on a Monday afternoon. All right, so before I close out, are there any more questions, any more comments? If so, feel free to post. Again, if you're in the nonprofit Utopia community, feel free to continue the conversation in the community. If you want to set up office hours so we can discuss any of this stuff as it relates to yourself and your organization, let me know. And without further ado, it doesn't look like we have any more questions or comments. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule again to join us again at almost 5 o'clock on a Monday after a wonderful weekend. So thank you. All right. And we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be talking with Sherry Kwam Taylor at 10 o'clock. We will be talking about how you can raise millions of dollars for your organization, for general operations, right? All right. So again, it looks like there are no questions, so I am going to end the broadcast. Take care. Bye bye.